first things first. So, what are the most common financial issues you see of divorce?
So, so every divorce has two main financial components. There's the issue of support, and
Mm-hmm.
then there's the issue of division of assets. So those are two broad categories. Most divorces, that is where the attention is focused on after the beginning, more emotional phase of the case sort of simmers down, and issues with children, custody schedules, those are resolved. So that leaves money issues, and of course, depending on how much money there is to fight over, it can be a pretty big battle. And obviously, the personalities involved can
Sure.
affect how contentious the fight. But those two main areas, support and assets.
So, in my world, I see, police officers are notorious for getting divorces. We have a higher rate of divorce
Correct.
across pretty much every career. And so, one of the things I see a lot of times when it's getting really nasty in these divorces is that fight over the retirements and the 401ks.
Yeah.
And I guess how would somebody that is going through that battle, how are they, is there a way to set it up to where they can protect those assets?
Yeah. I mean, pension and retirement are sometimes the most valuable assets that people have,
Hmm.
especially in longer marriages. And so, for the average family, let's call them middle class, um, for any particular area, they might own a home, they might have retirement or pension assets. And that goes for couples where both parties work, or maybe just the husband, police officer, or he's in the military. Oftentimes, these pensions, for a long career, for a high paid position, they can be worth millions of dollars. And sometimes the parties might own a residence after a long marriage, and there might be equity, in the home. Not
Sure.
always. Uh, and sometimes pensions have loans against them, and so do homes. So there are sometimes these assets are leveraged against debt. It is true that people get very attached to their pensions. In my experience, police officers, military, teachers, they have pensions. They've worked hard for it. They've been counting down the days and years to their retirement, and they want to get the benefit of those retirement assets. And in almost every case, these assets are marital property completely. It's going to be shared 50-50 with the spouse. And when I say it's going to be shared, I'm talking from the day of the wedding through the day that the divorce is actually filed and commenced.
Mm.
You might have police officers or teachers or military that have contributed to their pension before the marriage, and that's all theirs. That's their separate property. It's called. The marital portion is defined based on a formula, and it's as of the wedding date through the date of filing of the divorce. And
Okay.
this is an important issue because sometimes people will delay the divorce filing for various reasons. Sometimes they're separated. They're not sure if they're going to go down the road for a divorce. And you have one party who's still contributing to retirement.
Hmm.
And that can go on for months and sometimes years. And it's always an unpleasant surprise that I'm sorry, but all this money you've been contributing, your wife is still going to get half of that money. And it's important that people know that because sometimes they might want to file sooner to protect. And that's one of the ways you can protect your pension contributions, 401k contributions, IRA contributions. All retirement assets are sort of, they work the same way. Contributions made during the marriage are going to be divided 50-50. And that can be a tough pill to swallow for some people.
So, do you think that the best option is if you're going through a separation, should you hold up any more deposits
Yeah,
into those retirement accounts?
sometimes that's the way to go. I mean, this is an important reason why people should get legal advice when they're going through marital difficulties. Not necessarily because, and I remember our last conversation, I'm going to encourage them to file for divorce. A lot of times that's not the best advice. But if they're motivated to save some money, they
Hmm.
don't want to give 50% of every dollar they contribute to their ex. Yeah, some of the ways to do that is to stop contributing to retirement assets. Because once you contribute, she's going to get half. And
Okay.
once you file the divorce, those contributions become solely yours. So it's a pretty important decision. It's one of the ways that people can start to protect themselves if they're in an iffy situation,
Right.
marriage wise.
Now, are there accounts out there or investment opportunities that would be off limits to the spouse, or is basically everything fair game?
As long as you're married and you're earning a paycheck, and let's assume you're working on the books, as most police officers are. You know, they might have a second job or other sources of income that are not, um, being reported, or it might be cash. But for the average person that has a paycheck, that money's coming in. That's marital funds. It's
Hmm.
marital property. So you really can't hide it or divert it that easily.
Okay.
If you're putting it in the bank account, that's also going to be divided equally. If you're putting it in retirement, not only is it marital property, you can't get your hands on it anymore. If that money is used to pay a mortgage or bills for the family, most people are living some version of paycheck to paycheck. There's not much money left over.
Right.
Um, and also credit card debts usually are split. If they're for marital expenses, those are getting shared equally. So people have to know that, because you don't want to run up credit card charges and think you're not going to be responsible. It doesn't matter whose name the debts are in. It
Okay.
matters what purpose they were used for. So
Okay.
these are all reasons why people need to consult with counsel and find out what they're headed for in case things deteriorate. Another issue I see with police officers in particular is overtime. That can be a huge factor when it comes to child support or even spousal support, because
Mm.
if you know you're working a lot of overtime, we're in 2019, put in a lot of overtime, and that's now going to end up on your tax return, because again, you can't really hide that income.
Right.
You better make sure you continue to work that overtime, because when child support's being calculated, they're looking at your income. They're looking to see what went on in the past year or two. And so if you consistently worked overtime or got vacation pay or other types of bonuses,
Hmm.
for sure that's going to be used sometimes against you when it comes to calculating your support obligations.
So not only are any assets pretty much going to be split 50-50.
Correct.
So the debts incurred by each party, by the spouse, by each spouse will be basically split 50-50 as well.
Not all debts, but a lot of them. So, for example, student loan debts are not going
Hmm.
to be shared. Student loan
Okay.
debts are separate. If you have, and this is a common example, one party who uses a credit card to go have plastic surgery for cosmetic enhancement,
Mm.
that's not going to be divided equally.
Okay.
Gambling debts, or for, really spending that's a little bit extraordinary, that's probably not going to be divided equally. But the things that families tend to put on the credit card are family vacations, a trip to Disney World, home improvements, groceries, gas for the car. Those are all marital expenses. And a good lawyer knows that if you're going to be splitting up the value of the pension, you also have to address the debt. Um,
Sure.
and as I mentioned earlier, sometimes people take out loans against their homes, against their pension, because sometimes the interest rates are better.
Right.
And that has to be addressed too. Those debts are shared.
Okay.
So it is fair. The law is pretty fair.
So it would almost be itemized, and each debt and asset taken into account. So each one would be looked at
Correct.
individually. Okay.
That's correct. The starting point for almost every divorce case, right at the beginning, is really everyone getting on the same page about what are the assets, what are the debts, what is the income of the family, what are the expenses. So those
Okay.
are four broad categories. Most of my clients do that from the outset working with me, and I know the other side, the other spouse, is doing it with their attorney. And there's something called a financial affidavit. At some point in the case, these are going to be exchanged. And the starting point of every case is, do we all agree on what the assets are? Do we agree that what the debts are, and the income and the expenses? Sometimes, and the trickier cases, people don't agree on what the assets are. There are assets that are missing. Uh, you know, um, it could be that someone is not being truthful about their assets, and people are not always truthful about their income. So
Right.
those are trickier cases, because if we're not going to agree on that, it's going to be harder to work out what the 50-50 split really is on these types of assets.
So if I'm in a marriage that's having problems and I see that my wife has just went out and bought a car, a boat, and some other kind of high ticket price items. What
Right.
can I do at that point to try to keep
Okay.
myself from having to pay on those assets or on those items?
So that's a very good question. First of all, it depends on whether or not the car or the boat is an asset or a debt. Because if you're leasing a
Right.
car, it's a debt. And the person who leases the car and continues to drive that car is going to walk away with that entire debt. So
Okay.
that's a little bit easier. But if you have someone who's financed a car,
Hmm.
maybe put down 5 or 10,000, or traded in a car to buy another car, that's not a debt. That's an asset. So the value of that asset has to be split. So if the person's going to drive away with that car, there's some residual value there. Maybe it's $5 or $10,000. Then that has to be adjusted somewhere. Maybe again,
Okay.
some of the other assets. So it's fair. There is usually a fair way to deal with that. Uh, assets that go missing are things like people will buy. Bitcoin is a big one these days for
Oh
wealthier
yeah.
individuals, or gold bullion, or gift cards, or cash, jewelry. It could be firearms. There are all kinds of things you could spend your money on and hide them away.
Sure.
And how is your spouse going to really find out where it is? Um, like I said, jewelry is a big one. It could be antique cars, could be tools in the garage. These are
Right.
things that can be valuable. I wouldn't recommend fighting over things that are only worth a few $1,000s when you're paying a lawyer, but it's
Sure.
important to have an assessment, to have an inventory. And one of the things people can do, if they want to be really careful, they should do this anyway, because this is just good advice in case you're ever robbed or there's a flood, is you should have a photograph of inventory of
Okay.
your stuff in the garage. You should do this in a happy marriage too.
Absolutely.
You should have a picture, just get a flash drive, take a whole bunch of pictures of all the jewelry, all the cash items, the tools, anything expensive that can be, taken away or damaged in a flood or by theft. You should have a
Yeah.
photographic inventory, and you're supposed to do it once a year. Most
Sure.
people, most people never do it, but
Yeah,
it's a
that's
good idea to do.
100% correct.
Yeah, it's a good idea to do. And I told you during our last conversation, I'm married. A few years ago, I read that this is a good idea to do, and my husband actually took out his video camera and took a long video of everything we had, and even spoke into the video, giving some details about some of the things. And now he has that in a safe place on a flash drive. If God forbid I'm ever robbed, or if there's a natural disaster, I feel like I have the evidence I need.
Sure.
But in a
Because
divorce situation, you want to do that too, for sure, for
and we
sure.
and we see that all the time whenever people have their cars broke into and a gun gets stolen
Right,
or their house gets broke into and they have all these items of value that get
right.
stolen.
Yep,
And a lot of times there's no serial numbers, there's very vague descriptions, no personal identification numbers that's going to be on there. So that is a great advice to everybody, whether you're in a happy marriage or not.
correct.
100%. Another thing I used to see a lot because I used to work some gambling um, type crimes and in Vice and that kind of thing, and I would see people come into some type of gambling house and just give their check away pretty
Uh-huh.
much from the 2 weeks. So if your spouse has a gambling issue
Right,
or some kind of vice that is
right,
just costing thousands and thousands of dollars, and you know that, but
correct.
if you're trying to work it out, whatever. But is there a way or somewhere that the spouse can put money away to
Yeah,
try to protect themselves from one, the spouse getting to that account, and
yeah,
two, if it ends badly, they still have a small nest egg that the gambling spouse can't have access to.
right. That's a very good question. And it's a decision that a couple has to make together. Because ultimately, if you're going to live together with a gambler, they have a compulsive spending habit, and you stay together with that person, you're taking very big risks. And it goes the same for actually drug addicts, people that are spending their money on drugs,
Sure.
or maybe people that are love buying, shopping. It could be firearms, it could be designer pocketbooks, whatever it is. If you have a spouse that spends a little bit too much, and it's impacting you, you have to do more than just say stop spending. Um, there's Gamblers Anonymous. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's like a
Hmm.
12-step program, similar to Alcohol Anonymous, where you have to basically admit the problem and hand over your paycheck to your spouse. They actually encourage you to do that because that is the only way. You have to surrender to the problem, give it up to a higher power, and agree that you are not in control of yourself. And until that you are, your spouse has to control the paycheck and give you an allowance. And I don't know how people feel about that. It can feel very demeaning, but
Hmm.
it is the road back to financial stability for a lot of families. And the problem that a lot of people have is that 5 years, 10 years into a situation like that, when they're approaching, foreclosure or bankruptcy and things are really bad, they'll come to a lawyer and say, my husband had this problem and I really didn't do anything about it. And now I want some of my money back. And there just is no way to do that because
Right.
the legal term is you've condoned it. Condoned, if you've condoned bad behavior, there's not necessarily a financial remedy. Now,
Okay.
on the other hand, we have cases where a couple will be married, they'll accumulate assets, and unbeknownst to the wife, let's say, the husband's been taking out loans against his retirement, maybe forging her signature, taking out debts, and he's going to the casino and she has no idea. Now,
Hmm.
in a divorce, she might wake up to the fact that our assets are missing. I thought we had more than we have. And that's when she learns for the first time that assets have been, it's called marital waste. Assets have been wasted. That's something that she might be able to get a remedy for. And I have had cases where we go to court, successfully show that money was spent on a mistress or on a gambling habit or drugs or something else. I've had cases where monies were wired overseas to family members, in the Middle East or in India. If
Hmm.
you didn't know this is going on and you find out, there is a way to make a claim in a divorce. And many times, if you can put on a credible case that I didn't know that there's $100,000 missing, the divorce judge will give you back half that money from other assets.
Okay.
So, it's an expensive type of thing to prove, but sometimes it's really worth it. It's really worth it. And, it's got to be worth, I would say, at least $50,000 before it's really worth litigating.
Okay. Right.
Sometimes you need to do it because you can have people that really feel victimized. They're
Sure.
waking up to, it's almost like another type of infidelity. They're waking up to the fact that their spouse has almost been robbing them and deceiving them. And if there's a way to get some of that money back, it is empowering, and some people feel like they need to do it. So
If the assets aren't there to take that $50,000 back from, would there ever be a situation where wages would be garnished to pay that
could
debt
be. I
back?
mean, yeah, if a couple is staying together and there's a $50,000 gambling debt that whether the wife knew about or not, but she's made a decision to stay married,
Hmm.
that gambling debt is going to be converted into a judgment. And once there's a judgment, it can attach to your salary. Absolutely, it can attach to your tax refund. It can attach to almost any asset you have. It can attach to your house. It can definitely affect the wife. She's not. But again, if she decides to stay married, maybe they'll find a way to work through that and pay that debt off. Another thing that people can do, again, if their goal is to stay married, is to do something called a postnuptial agreement. And a postnuptial agreement is a financial agreement that people make when they want to stay married, but they want to make sure that gambling debt is in writing and is only coming out of the husband's share, right?
Okay.
Or maybe the money he spent on a girlfriend, he's sorry about it. They're going to put it in writing. They're going to stay married, but that money is
Hmm.
going to come out of his share. This is a way for people to get some peace of mind, resolve
Right.
this type of conflict, decide to stay married, which people do. They forgive. Lots of times, this is a way to resolve it, and people don't even know that these types of agreements exist. It's important. It's important to know about it. For other people, this type of betrayal, financial betrayal, they're not going to be able to overcome it, and they are going to separate or file for divorce. But it's,
Right.
it's good to have options.
Sure. No, and honestly, I've never heard of the postnuptial agreement.
Oh,
Just listening to celebrity news and that kind of stuff. I think everybody knows of the prenup and
yep.
the prenuptial agreement, but I don't hear as often the postnuptial. And
Yeah, people.
so I think that's great advice.
Yeah, I mean, Actually, I do a lot of speaking on this topic. Prenuptial and postnuptial agreements are more common than ever because millennials, that's people under 35, let's call them, they're very interested in doing prenuptial agreements. They're marrying later. They have more education than their parents at the time of
Hmm.
marriage. Most parents, the older generation got married in their early 20s.
Sure.
Millennials are marrying in their later 20s and even in their 30s. So they have assets to protect. And you don't have to be a millionaire. You just have to say, I want what's mine. I want to protect it. And it's like a form of divorce insurance, whether it's a prenup or a postnup, and people are interested in them. They don't cost very much either,
Really?
and it can be a way to almost open up discussion before a marriage. What do you have? What are your debts? Do you expect spousal support if you get divorced? These are things that can be put in writing, and I see it more and more. Young people are much more open to talking about these topics. I think for people that are over uh, 35, over 50, the older generations,
Hmm.
it was more of a taboo topic.
Right.
Yeah, prenups were like you're marrying a gold digger, you need a
Sure.
prenup. That's not how young people look at them anymore. It's changing.
You
The
think it's
stigma
just
has gone away.
because you think it's just because divorce is just so much more common now, and
Yeah,
they're kind of pragmatic about it. Like, well, the chances are,
exactly.
and so, well, I mean, I
Right.
think that's, I hate thinking. I think a lot of people would look at it, especially from the older generations, thinking that, well, you're going into the marriage already with some preconceived notions that, you know,
Right.
this isn't a concrete set in
Yeah, I mean,
stone marriage,
but
but at the
it's a
same
forty
time,
percent. It's
yeah,
a 40% risk.
it's a
The
real
divorce rate.
realistic.
Yeah, it's very smart because the divorce rate is 40%. It really is. It might be a little higher in the South, actually.
Sure.
It's about 40%, like I said, because people are getting divorced less because they're marrying later.
Mm.
But 40% is pretty high. I mean,
That's pretty
if
high.
yeah, if you thought you were going to go outside and get hit by lightning, 40%, you'd probably do something about it.
You'd probably stay inside.
Exactly. So the prenup, the postnup, it takes away that risk. Yeah, it's not the most romantic thing in the world, but
Right.
in an era of no fault divorce, and people that are a little bit less traditional and a little bit less religious, and divorce doesn't have that same negative stigma. Uh, I think people are more open to it, and
Right.
it is a financial document, and so people can accept it on those terms. I had a house, I owned it before the marriage, it belongs to me. Or I had a business, or I had the retirement money is safe anyway because retirement money you don't need a prenup for that.
Right.
Retirement monies and pensions are actually it's almost like a prenup already in place because it's very clear what contributions were made before the marriage. And
Okay.
but I'll tell you what I see a lot, Adam, is for second marriages, people will get married, they'll have a pension, they're contributing, they're not really afraid to get married, but they want to get married on the condition that their retirement is theirs, even if they
Hmm.
contribute during the
Sure.
marriage. Or they want to get married with separate bank accounts, and whatever I earn is mine, whatever you earn is yours. And sometimes people will agree to that. That's their condition. They'll agree to get married, but they want everything in writing that I get to keep 100% of my money.
Right.
Um, but there's nothing wrong with it as long as people are they have lawyers that tell them what they're doing and they do it for the right reasons. It could actually lead to marriage. It could actually lead to more traditional um, relationships because the money stuff is addressed in advance.
Right. And I think no, I think it will make things a lot less messy too, especially
Yeah,
when you got kids involved at the same time as the financial portion. And I know a lot of people have, the financial aspect is a huge portion of things that lead to the distress in a marriage.
right.
And
Absolutely.
so I think that actually could bode well for
Mhm.
the marriage, especially if you do have that peace of mind, and
Correct.
it makes things so much cleaner though in the end if it does come to divorce. And so no, I think that's great
Yeah.
advice, and it looks like we're coming up on our time. And so I just want to thank you again for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come on
My pleasure. I'm
and
glad you
uh,
asked me to speak.
and give these great tidbits. Hopefully, maybe I can talk you into coming on again in the future. And
I would love to. I'm sorry that we didn't really cover everything. We covered a lot of the sort of the highlights, but if you think in a couple of months you want to have me back on again, if you get some feedback from your listeners on this topic,
absolutely,
we can discuss maybe custody next time. Talk to
Perfect.